In the serene suburbs of Willow Creek, where cobblestone paths wove through picturesque streets lined with colonial-style homes, Isabel Harper's life was a symphony of routine. Each morning she rose before the sun's first light. Her days began with quiet precision. She packed lunches with care, peanut butter sandwiches for her 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, and neatly sliced apples for her 6-year-old son, Ethan. By the time her husband, Adrian, emerged for work, his crisp suit was always waiting, perfectly pressed, a testament to her devotion. On this particular September morning, as the golden hues of autumn danced across the kitchen floor, everything seemed as ordinary as ever. Isabel hummed softly while preparing her family's breakfast, the faint aroma of coffee mingling with the crisp fall air. Yet, unbeknownst to her, this day would mark the unraveling of the life she had so carefully built. The first crack in her perfect world came in the form of a crumpled receipt, innocuous at first glance, that fluttered from Adrian's jacket pocket as she hung it in the laundry room. She froze, the laundry basket slipping from her grasp. Her eyes locked onto the elegantly embossed name, Le Rouge, an exclusive French restaurant nestled downtown. The figure scrawled below was staggering, $287.42. A quiet thunder roared in her ears as the date caught her attention. Last Thursday. The same Thursday Adrian had sworn he was at the office, tirelessly working on the Dunmore case. Her hands trembled as she held the damning evidence. Her mind raced, remembering his call that evening. His voice heavy with exhaustion, his apology for missing dinner delivered with mechanical sincerity. He'd sounded distant, but she dismissed it, chalking it up to the pressures of his high-powered career. Now the truth loomed before her, a storm cloud threatening to engulf everything. The elegant font of the receipt burned into her memory as her heart pounded in her chest. Isabel clutched it tighter, her breath quickening as doubt and dread seeped into her consciousness. Was it possible? Had her husband, a man she trusted and built a life with, betrayed her? The kitchen, once her sanctuary, now felt stifling, the walls closing in as her world began to fracture, piece by piece. What lay ahead, she did not yet know, but the fissures in her perfect life had begun to widen, promising chaos, heartbreak, and revelations she was not prepared to face. "Mommy, can you help me with my science project?" Sophie's voice cut through the swirling storm of Isabel's thoughts, sharp and innocent, yanking her back to the present. She looked up from the crumpled receipt in her hand, its damning numbers seared into her mind. Forcing a smile, Isabel slipped it into her pocket, her fingers trembling as if burned. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let me just finish folding these clothes." The rest of the day unfolded in a haze of mundane tasks, each one pulling at the fragile thread of her focus. She sat beside Sophie, painstakingly helping her glue foam planets to a cardboard solar system. She reviewed Ethan's spelling words, his small, eager face a cruel reminder of the innocence she fought to protect. But no matter how hard she tried to stay present, her mind kept drifting, always back to that number. 287.42. A sum too indulgent for a business dinner and far too intimate for a casual meeting. By the afternoon, her unease had settled into a gnawing certainty. Isabel had texted Adrian, asking when he'd be home, her words deliberately casual. No reply. As the hours ticked by, the silence grew deafening, stretching taut like a rubber band about to snap. Evening arrived and the scent of chicken pot pie, Adrian's favorite, wafted through the kitchen. Isabel set the table with quiet precision, her movements mechanical. She couldn't stop glancing at the empty chair at the head of the table. When Ethan finally asked, "Where's Daddy?" while pushing peas around his plate, her heart clenched. "Working late, honey," she replied, her voice betraying none of the turmoil churning inside. "Important case." The lie slipped out so effortlessly now, honed by months of rehearsing excuses for his absences, his lateness, his growing distance. But tonight, the weight of it all felt unbearable. Isabel sat at the table, her children's chatter barely registering. The receipt in her pocket burned like a live ember against her skin, a relentless reminder of the truth she couldn't yet face. The hollow ache in her chest spread as the minutes passed, the dinner uneaten on his plate a silent witness to the cracks forming in their carefully constructed life. Late nights at the office. How many times had Isabel whispered those words to herself? A mantra she desperately clung to in her growing sea of doubt. As she tucked Sophie and Ethan into bed that night, their sleepy smiles and soft murmurs tugged at her already fragile heart. Once the house was silent, she returned to the darkened kitchen. There she sat alone, the crumpled receipt clutched in her hand like a talisman of betrayal. Her laptop cast a dim glow across the room as she hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She hadn't logged into their joint account in months, trusting Adrian completely with their finances, just as she had with everything else in their life. Tonight, though, something inside her shifted. A need, a demand to know. With a deep breath, she entered the password and watched as the truth unfolded before her in stark, unapologetic rows of transactions. Luxury jewelry stores. High-end hotels. Lavish restaurants she'd never heard of, let alone visited. Her chest tightened, the enormity of it suffocating. Each entry was a blow, a reminder of a life she wasn't part of, a life Adrian had crafted elsewhere. At 11:42 p.m., the front door clicked open, and the sound of his footsteps broke the suffocating silence. Normally steady and confident, they were hesitant now, tentative. Isabel didn't turn around as he entered, her back rigid as she stared at the glowing screen. Her voice, calm yet razor-sharp, sliced through the stillness. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do," he replied, his tone carrying a weight that made her heart falter. She slowly turned to face him, her stomach churning as she took in the man before her. He was a shadow of the husband she had loved for 12 years. His collar was crooked, his hair unkempt, details that once might have made her smile, but now felt like cracks in the facade. And his eyes, those warm, familiar brown eyes that had once held her in their depth, were hollow, detached. A stranger stood in her kitchen, and in that moment, Isabel knew the life she had carefully built was about to collapse under the weight of secrets too heavy to bear. "I'm leaving, Isabel." 3 words. 12 years of marriage, 2 children, and a lifetime of shared dreams, all reduced to 3 words delivered with chilling detachment. She froze, her breath caught in her throat as the ground seemed to shift beneath her. But he wasn't finished. "Her name is Veronica," Adrian continued, his tone disturbingly measured, as if delivering the minutes of a corporate meeting. "She's pregnant." The room spun, the weight of his words crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Isabel gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white against the cool granite. "Pregnant," she echoed, her voice barely more than a whisper. The word felt alien and acrid on her tongue, each syllable scraping like sandpaper. Adrian's gaze faltered, and he had the audacity to soften his tone, as though it might temper the devastation. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. You'll be taken care of, child support, alimony, the house. Everything will be handled, fairly." "Fairly?" The word erupted from her lips, bitter and incredulous. As if anything about this could be fair. Her voice trembled with fury and heartbreak, raw and unrestrained. "How long?" she demanded, her throat tightening as she forced the question out. He hesitated, the silence thick and damning. 8 months, he finally admitted, his eyes darting away from hers. "It wasn't planned, Isabel. It just happened. 8 months." The number twisted like a knife in her chest. 8 months while she had been planning their anniversary dinner, while she had been helping Sophie master her first-grade spelling tests, while she had been building their life brick by brick. All the while he had been building another, one that didn't include her. The words surged from her, quiet at first, then rising in strength until they shattered the fragile veneer of calm. "Get out." Her voice was steel, unyielding, slicing through the tension like a blade. "Isabel, please," Adrian started, his tone almost pleading. "Let's discuss this rationally." "Rationally?" A harsh, bitter laugh escaped her lips, void of humor. "You want rational? Here's rational. You have 30 minutes to pack whatever you need and leave. The rest? The lawyers can deal with it. But you," her voice cracked, fury and grief warring for dominance, "you get out of this house. Now." Adrian opened his mouth as if to argue, but her piercing glare stopped him cold. Without another word, he turned and ascended the stairs, his footsteps the final nails in the coffin of their marriage. "You want rational?" Isabel's voice was sharp, unwavering, cutting through the charged silence like a blade. "Here's rational. You have 30 minutes to pack whatever you need and leave. The rest can wait for the lawyers to sort out." 30 minutes, Adrian. Starting now." He opened his mouth as if to protest, but her steely gaze stopped him in his tracks. The tension in the air was suffocating, and after a moment's hesitation, he seemed to recognize the futility of his arguments. Without another word, Adrian turned and made his way upstairs. Isabel remained rooted in place, her arms crossed tightly as if to hold herself together. She listened as his footsteps echoed overhead, each sound a painful punctuation mark in the slow dismantling of their shared life. The opening and closing of drawers, the muffled thud of a suitcase being dragged across the floor, it was a grim symphony, each note hammering another nail into the coffin of their 12-year marriage. 28 minutes later, Adrian appeared at the front door, suitcase in hand. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his choices, his usually confident demeanor replaced by an air of reluctant resignation. He paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you." Isabel's eyes locked on him, her expression an icy mask that concealed the tempest raging within. This man, this stranger who had once been her everything, now stood before her as the architect of her heartbreak. Her voice, though quiet, was unrelenting. "You didn't mean to hurt me? You gave up the right to care about my feelings the moment you chose to start a new family while pretending to be part of ours." The weight of her words seemed to land heavily on him, but Isabel didn't waver. She stepped aside, her silent command clear. Adrian hesitated briefly, then nodded and stepped through the doorway. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click, an understated sound that belied the enormity of what had just transpired. Isabel stood in the dimly lit foyer, listening as his car started, the engine rumbling faintly before the crunch of tires on gravel signaled his departure. The sound grew softer and softer until it disappeared into the night, leaving her alone in the stillness of the home they had built together. Only now it wasn't their home anymore, it was hers, and hers alone. When the house finally fell silent, Isabel let herself collapse against the wall, her legs giving way beneath her. She slid to the cold floor, her body racked with silent sobs that she no longer had the strength to hold back. 4 hours she had held herself together, a fortress of composure. Now, in the stillness, the weight of everything she had lost crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Above her, she heard the soft padding of Sophie's feet crossing the hallway. Her daughter's small, uncertain voice drifted down the stairs. "Mommy? Is everything okay?" Isabel hastily wiped her eyes, drawing in a deep, trembling breath. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," she called back, forcing her voice to sound steady, even warm. "Go back to bed." Sophie hesitated for a moment, then her footsteps retreated. Isabel listened until the sound faded, leaving her alone once more in the darkened foyer. But everything was far from fine. Her world had crumbled, leaving her stranded amid the ruins with 2 children, an unforgiving mortgage, and the tattered remains of her self-worth. She sat there, knees pulled to her chest, her mind replaying the past 12 years in excruciating detail. Like a bitter slideshow, memories flickered before her. The college degree she had abandoned so he could chase his ambitions, the friendships she had let slip away, the dreams she had shelved for someday. All the sacrifices she had made, believing they were for something greater, a future they would build together. And now that future was gone, replaced by a harsh, unfamiliar reality. Tomorrow she would have to face the impossible. Tomorrow she would sit her children down and explain that their father wasn't coming home. Tomorrow she would have to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other, how to piece together a life from the fragments he had left behind. Tomorrow she would have to be strong. But tonight, in the suffocating quiet of her broken home, Isabel allowed herself to grieve. She mourned not just the marriage she had lost, but the woman she had been, the woman who had dreamed, who had trusted, who had believed in forever. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, casting faint streaks of gold across the room, Isabel finally stirred. Her tears had dried, but her resolve had begun to harden. She rose unsteadily to her feet, a flicker of determination glimmering in the depths of her sorrow. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, the fight to reclaim the life she had been forced to abandon. As the faint light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Isabel finally rose from the floor. Her legs were stiff, her eyes swollen, and her heart still heavy, but somewhere deep within her, something new had ignited, a spark of determination, a flicker of defiance. This wasn't how her story would end. She walked to the kitchen, the stillness of the house amplifying every creak of the floor beneath her. Sitting at the table, she opened her laptop with a steadying breath. Her fingers hesitated, hovering over the keyboard, before navigating to the Willow State University website. Then Apply Now button glowed on the screen, daring her to take the leap. She stared at it for a long moment, memories of abandoned dreams and what-ifs flashing through her mind. Then, with a decisive click, she chose herself for the first time in years. It was time to reclaim the woman she had set aside for far too long. 3 months later, Isabel found herself seated in a lecture hall, the weight of her decision settling in as she attended her first college class in over a decade. Her notebook lay open on the desk before her, untouched, while the students around her, barely out of their teens, typed furiously on sleek laptops. The professor's voice filled the room, discussing the intricacies of business economics, but Isabel's mind was miles away. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's tear-streaked face that morning, his small voice asking when his father would come back. Or Sophie's growing silence at breakfast, her once bright chatter replaced by an unnerving quiet. Guilt gnawed at Isabel's resolve, the weight of her children's pain pressing heavily on her shoulders. Was she doing the right thing? Could she truly balance it all, school, motherhood, and the shreds of her former life? The familiar buzz of her phone broke her thoughts, sending a jolt of anxiety through her. She glanced at the screen. Another message from Adrian's lawyer about adjusting the custody schedule. Her stomach clenched, the unwelcome reminder of the battle she still had to fight. Without reading it, she silenced the notification and forced her attention back to the professor. She'd fought too hard to be here, sacrificed too much to let herself falter now. With a deep breath, Isabel picked up her pen and began to write. This wasn't just about earning a degree, it was about reclaiming her life. She wasn't just a mother or an ex-wife or a woman left behind. She was Isabel Harper, and she was ready to rebuild. The lecture droned on, Professor Harrington's voice weaving through the concepts of market equilibrium, but Isabel's thoughts were elsewhere, teetering on the edge of distraction. She had fought too hard to earn her place in this classroom to let her focus waver now. Just as she steadied herself to listen, her phone buzzed again, vibrating insistently on the desk. This time, it wasn't a lawyer or a notification she could ignore. It was her babysitter's number flashing on the screen. Miss Harper? The professor's sharp tones sliced through her rising panic. Is everything all right? 20 pairs of curious eyes turned toward her, the weight of their attention making her skin prickle. Isabel flushed deeply as she fumbled to gather her belongings. I'm sorry I have to go, it's my children, she murmured, her voice a blend of apology and urgency. The drive to Ethan's elementary school felt like an eternity. The nurse's description had been brief. Her 6-year-old son had fallen ill, pale and miserable in the office, waiting for her. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with the logistics of what came next. Sophie needed to be picked up from her school in less than an hour. The tightly woven threads of Isabel's new life, school, work, motherhood, were unraveling faster than she could hold them together, and it wasn't even noon. Mommy, I don't feel good, Ethan whimpered from the back seat, his small voice a dagger to her already frayed nerves. I know, baby, she replied softly, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. We'll be home soon. Her reflection revealed her own exhaustion. Dark circles under her eyes, tension etched into her features. How long could she keep this up? The constant juggling, the relentless demands, how much more could she give before she broke? Her phone rang, the sound cutting through the tense silence of the car. Adrian's name flashed across the dashboard display, and her chest tightened. Not now. She hit decline, her fingers trembling slightly. The last thing she needed was another conversation about how her choices, returning to school, trying to rebuild her life, were an inconvenience to him. As she drove on, the weight of everything threatened to crush her. But then she glanced back at Ethan, his flushed face nestled against the car seat, and she pressed on. For her children, for herself, for the future she was determined to carve out, she would keep going. No matter how impossible it seemed, she couldn't afford to stop. Declining the call, Isabel exhaled sharply, frustration bubbling under her breath. The last thing she needed was another lecture from Adrian about how her return to college was disrupting the children's routine. He didn't see the nights she stayed up past midnight studying after they were asleep, or the mornings she rushed between classes and drop-offs, barely holding it all together. After settling Ethan on the couch with a bowl of soup and his favorite cartoons, she opened her laptop, determined to salvage what was left of the day. Her lecture notes from earlier stared back at her, a silent reminder of what she'd missed. But when she logged into her banking app, the sight of her nearly empty account made her stomach twist. Adrian's first alimony payment wasn't due for another week, and her part-time virtual assistant job barely stretched far enough to cover groceries, let alone anything else. The crushing weight of it all, single parenthood, financial stress, academic pressure, pressed down on her chest until it felt hard to breathe. She closed her laptop, her hands trembling, her mind spinning with what-ifs and impossible choices. How long could she keep walking this tightrope without falling? The sudden chime of the doorbell broke through her spiral of thoughts, startling her. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, her breath caught. Standing on her doorstep was an impeccably dressed man in his early 40s. His silver-streaked hair was neatly combed, and his tailored suit spoke of wealth and authority. Mrs. Harper? He asked, his voice warm but commanding, laced with a subtle confidence. I'm Lucas Bennett. I believe you're doing some virtual assistant work for my company. Her heart sank, dread washing over her. Had she made a mistake with the reports? Was this why he was here? Mr. Bennett, she began, but he cut her off gently. "Please call me Lucas," he said, his smile softening the sharp edges of his presence. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and created faint creases at the corners. "I've been reviewing your work on our latest project. Your attention to detail and the suggestions you included, well, they're impressive." Isabel blinked, relief flooding her. She hadn't expected praise. "Thank you," she murmured, though her voice still carried a note of uncertainty. Before she could say more, a loud crash from inside the house made her turn sharply. Ethan's voice followed, teary and distressed. "Mommy, I spilled the soup." She winced. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Bennett, Lucas. My son is sick and I—" "Say no more," he interrupted, already rolling up his sleeves. "Let me help." As he stepped inside, Isabel couldn't help but feel a strange mix of embarrassment and curiosity. Who was this man and why was he here, offering to help clean up spilled soup? Little did she know, his unexpected arrival would mark the beginning of a transformation she hadn't dared to imagine. "I have to say your attention to detail is remarkable," Lucas said, his tone carrying an easy confidence. "Especially the suggestions you included about streamlining our documentation process. Those were insightful." Relief washed over Isabel like a warm tide. After all the self-doubt and sleepless nights, hearing praise from someone like him felt almost surreal. "Oh, thank you," she said, her voice tinged with surprise. "I just thought—" A sudden crash echoed from inside, followed by Ethan's distressed wail. Isabel froze, her heart leaping into her throat. "I'm so sorry, my son is sick and I—" she began, but Ethan's teary voice interrupted her from the other room. "Mommy?" The urgency in his tone sent her rushing inside, leaving Lucas standing in the doorway. She found Ethan sitting on the floor, his flushed cheeks streaked with tears. The soup bowl lay shattered beside him, a puddle of broth spreading across the tiles. He hiccuped through his sobs. "I tried to get water, but—" "It's okay, sweetheart," Isabel said gently, crouching down to wipe his tears. "Accidents happen." She grabbed some paper towels, her mind racing to comfort Ethan while salvaging the mess. From the doorway, Lucas watched, an uncertain expression flickering across his face. This wasn't exactly the professional impression Isabel had hoped to make with the CEO of her contract employer. She felt her cheeks burn as she worked quickly, her back turned to him. "Let me help," Lucas offered, stepping inside and already rolling up the sleeves of his immaculate shirt. "No, you really don't have to," she started, but he was already picking up the shattered pieces of the bowl with practiced efficiency. "I insist," he said, flashing a calm, reassuring smile. "I have a nephew about your son's age. Kids get sick. Spills happen. It's part of the package." Despite herself, Isabel felt a flicker of gratitude and curiosity. This wasn't the cold, aloof executive she had imagined. Lucas moved with the easy confidence of someone unbothered by the chaos, carefully gathering the broken pieces while she finished cleaning the spill. Ethan's sobs subsided as she handed him a fresh bowl of soup, the crisis averted. As she turned back to Lucas, their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't how she had planned to meet him, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she wondered if the universe had a way of introducing new beginnings in the most unexpected of ways. "Accidents happen," Lucas said with a wry smile as he stood, brushing off his hands after helping clean up. "But finding a virtual assistant who not only handles data entry but also identifies systemic inefficiencies? That doesn't happen every day." Isabel, still settling Ethan back onto the couch with a fresh bowl of soup, glanced at him in surprise. Before she could respond, Lucas leaned casually against the doorway, his expression warm yet professional. "That's actually why I'm here. We have a more permanent position opening in our operations department. Based on the quality of your work, I'd like you to consider applying." Her breath caught, disbelief flashing across her face. I'm flattered," she stammered, blinking as though she'd misheard. "But I'm just starting my business degree. I don't have the qualifications for something like that." Lucas's smile deepened, his tone both firm and encouraging. "You have practical experience and natural insight, Isabel. The degree will come in time, and we offer tuition assistance for employees continuing their education. You're exactly the kind of talent we value." The weight of his words sank in, a spark of possibility flickering in her chest. She opened her mouth to respond, but the buzzing of her phone cut through the moment. Isabel glanced at the screen, Sophie's school. Her stomach tightened. "I'm so sorry," she said, already moving to grab her bag. "I have to pick up my daughter." "Of course." Lucas's understanding was instant and genuine. As she headed for the door, he pulled a sleek business card from his pocket and handed it to her. Think about it. The role offers flexible hours and remote work options. We value talent, Mrs. Harper, in whatever form it comes. She nodded, murmuring her thanks, and hurried out the door, her mind racing as much as her feet. Later, as she sat in the school pickup line, the card lay on the passenger seat beside her. She glanced at it, noticing for the first time the handwriting on the back. Lucas Bennett, direct line. For a long moment, Isabel stared at the card, her heart and mind caught in a tug-of-war between fear and hope. A door had been opened, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest glimmer of what might lie beyond it. Beneath the soft glow of the kitchen light, Isabel sat at her worn wooden table, surrounded by the chaos of her life, stacks of bills and open textbook, her laptop still paused on the lecture she'd missed. The business card lay in the center, stark against the clutter, its presence quietly insistent. The handwritten note on the back echoed in her mind, "Real potential shouldn't be wasted." For a moment she let herself wonder what could be. The idea of stepping through the door Lucas Bennett had opened for her felt both thrilling and terrifying. Just as she reached for the card, her phone lit up, vibrating insistently. "Adrian." She hesitated before answering, already bracing for the conversation. We need to talk about this college thing," he began, his tone brisk and impatient. "Victoria thinks?" "What Victoria thinks stopped mattering the day you chose her over our family," Isabel cut in sharply, her own firmness catching her off guard. Her heart pounded, but she didn't falter. "I'm doing this, Adrian. For me and for our children." He sighed, the sound heavy with frustration. "The kids need stability right now, not a mother who's barely present because she's playing college student." "No," Isabel said, her voice steady, calm even. "What they need is to see that when life knocks you down, you get back up. They need to learn that it's never too late to chase your dreams, no matter how impossible they seem. And they need to understand that their mother is more than just someone's wife or someone's ex-wife." Adrian was silent on the other end, the weight of her words lingering in the space between them. Isabel felt her confidence grow, bolstered by the truth of what she'd just said. For so long she'd allowed herself to be defined by others, by their expectations, their judgments, their choices. Not anymore. "I'm not asking for your approval," she added after a pause. "I'm asking you to respect the example I'm trying to set for them." He sighed again, but this time it sounded less dismissive. "You've changed him." "Yes," she replied simply, gripping the edge of the table for support. "I have." When the call ended, Isabel set her phone aside and picked up the business card once more. Its weight felt different now, lighter, purposeful. She placed it next to her laptop and opened a blank email, her fingers hovering over the keys. The decision was no longer clouded by doubt or fear. She was ready to take the first step, not for anyone else but for herself, and for the future her children deserved to witness. "Yes," Isabel replied, her voice steady and resolute. "I have." The silence on the line was deafening, but it didn't unnerve her. Adrian's soft exhale carried a weight she no longer felt compelled to shoulder. When the call ended, Isabel placed the phone on the table and stared at Lucas Bennett's card resting beside it. The corporate world was foreign to her, intimidating in its polished, fast-paced demands. She had no formal experience, no completed degree, and 2 young children relying on her every move. But as her gaze swept across the cluttered kitchen, the textbooks stacked beside unfinished bills, the drawings her kids had left on the counter, the remnants of a life she was rebuilding from scratch, she felt the faint stirrings of courage. Terror wasn't new to her, it had been her constant companion since Adrian walked out the door. And yet, through all the fear, here she was. Standing, fighting, surviving. Isabel reached for her laptop with trembling fingers, her heart pounding as she opened a blank email. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as if propelled by the weight of her resolve. She typed out her message to Lucas, each keystroke a declaration. She was done letting fear dictate her decisions. It was time to discover what she was truly capable of. As she finished the email, a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. She paused, her breath catching when she saw the subject line. "Your grade, business economics paper." Clicking it open, her eyes widened at the sight of her first B+. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. A tangible sign that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe she was beginning to thrive. 6 months later, Isabel stood in the bathroom of her office at Bennett Enterprises, smoothing her blazer and taking a deep, steadying breath. In just minutes, she would step into the quarterly operations meeting, presenting her analysis to the leadership team. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman both familiar and transformed. The Isabel Harper of 6 months ago might have crumbled under the weight of such pressure. But now, even as nerves flickered in her stomach, there was a quiet strength in her eyes. A strength born from countless late nights, endless sacrifices, and a refusal to give up on herself. "You've got this," she whispered to her reflection, squaring her shoulders. And for the first time in a long time she believed it. The meeting was set to begin in 20 minutes, and Isabel stood in the office bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her pulse raced, a mix of nerves and anticipation coursing through her. This was her first major presentation since joining Bennett Enterprises, and the stakes couldn't feel higher. She smoothed the lapels of her blazer, her mind flickering back to the countless late nights spent perfecting her analysis while her children slept soundly in the next room. "You've got this," she whispered to herself, her voice steadying the doubts that threatened to creep in. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention. It was a text from Madison, her trusted friend from the single parent support group who was watching Sophie and Ethan. "Kids had dinner, homework's done. They're asking if they can wait up for you. Okay to let them?" A pang of guilt gripped her. She pictured their eager faces, longing to see her after a day apart. But tonight was too important. Another piece of the life she was fighting to rebuild. She took a deep breath and typed back, "Tell them one bedtime story then sleep. Promise I'll peek in when I get home." As she slipped her phone into her pocket and gathered her presentation materials, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway of her office. Lucas Bennett. These days, his presence brought a flutter to her stomach that had nothing to do with nerves. "Ready for the big moment?" he asked, his warm smile softening the sharpness of his steel blue eyes. "As ready as I'll ever be," Isabel replied, clutching her tablet a little tighter. Despite her preparation, doubt lingered. "Though I'm still not sure the board will appreciate criticism from the newest employee. They'll appreciate solutions from someone brave enough to offer them," Lucas said without hesitation, his tone carrying a quiet assurance that made her shoulders relax. For a moment, the weight of the presentation felt lighter. She glanced at Lucas, grateful for his steady presence, even if unspoken boundaries still separated their worlds. With a final deep breath, she straightened her spine and gave him a determined nod. "Let's do this," she said, and as she stepped toward the boardroom, she realized she wasn't just proving herself to the company, she was proving herself to the woman she was becoming. Lucas stepped further into Isabel's office, closing the door behind him with an air of quiet urgency. His usually composed expression held a trace of unease, a rare crack in his otherwise confident demeanor. "There's something I need to tell you before the meeting," he began, his voice low but firm. "Richard Crawford will be there." The name alone sent a jolt through Isabel. Her stomach tightened as she set down her tablet. "Crawford?" she asked, trying to mask the apprehension creeping into her voice. She'd heard the whispers around the office. Lucas's former business partner, brilliant yet ruthless, a man whose return to Boston was as mysterious as his departure years ago. Lucas nodded, tension etched into the lines of his face. "He's making a play for a board position. Claims he wants to protect his remaining interests in the company." "Why now?" Isabel pressed, studying the rare frustration in his expression. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, an uncharacteristic display of exasperation. "I'm not entirely sure. But I know this, Crawford has a knack for finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. Just be prepared. He'll look for any weakness he can use." The warning sent a shiver down Isabel's spine, but it also sparked a defiance she hadn't felt in years. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Lucas's gaze head-on. "I've survived worse than a hostile board member." For a moment, the tension in his features softened, replaced by admiration. "Yes, you have," he said quietly, stepping closer. Close enough that she could catch the faint, comforting scent of his cologne. The air between them shifted, heavy with unspoken emotions. "Isabel, after the meeting, I was wondering if..." A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Lucas stepped back, the professional mask slipping neatly back into place as an assistant poked her head inside. "Mr. Bennett, they're ready in the boardroom." Lucas nodded, his voice calm and composed once more. "Thank you. We'll be right there." As the door closed behind her, Isabel exhaled, grounding herself. Whatever tension had hung between them moments ago had dissipated, but its echo lingered. She adjusted her blazer, her resolve hardening. "Let's go," she said, her tone steady. Whatever challenges Richard Crawford, or anyone else, had in store for her, she was ready. She had faced far worse and come out stronger. She wasn't just fighting for a place in the room, she was proving she belonged there. Lucas stepped back, the warmth in his eyes replaced by a professional distance. "Shall we?" he asked, his tone composed. The boardroom loomed ahead, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of Boston's glittering skyline. Isabel swallowed hard, steadying herself as she stepped inside. 12 pairs of eyes turned to meet her, their weight palpable as she approached the podium. Among them was Richard Crawford. He was exactly as the office rumors had described, distinguished and sharp, with a gaze so calculating it felt like it could strip a person bare. Isabel exhaled and began her presentation, her voice wavering at first but growing stronger with each passing moment. She detailed her findings with precision, her analysis highlighting the company's bottlenecks, redundant processes, and the potential solutions that could transform their operations. Behind her, numbers and charts illuminated the screen, each point carefully crafted to reinforce her argument. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the city below, until Crawford's voice cut through like a blade. "Impressive analysis," he said smoothly, his tone laced with polite condescension. "Tell me, Mrs. Harper, how does a former housewife develop such remarkable insight into corporate operations?" The tension in the room spiked. Isabel could feel the weight of every gaze fixed on her. Lucas shifted slightly in his seat, his lips parting as if to intervene, but she beat him to it. Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. "The same way anyone develops insight, Mr. Crawford," she said, locking eyes with him. "Through observation, analysis, and a deep understanding that systems, whether managing a household budget or running a multinational corporation, succeed or fail based on efficiency and adaptation." The air in the room seemed to shift, her words hanging like a challenge. Crawford's lips pressed into a thin line, his sharp gaze studying her as though searching for a crack in her armor. But Isabel didn't flinch. She stood tall, the weight of her journey fueling her resolve. The room remained silent for a beat longer before Crawford leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't approval, it was something closer to acknowledgement. And in that moment, Isabel knew she had earned her place at the table. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, and no one, not even Richard Crawford, could take that from her. "Your personal relationship with our CEO," Crawford's voice carried a pointed undertone, his gaze sharp, "had no bearing on your rapid rise within the company?" Isabel opened her mouth to respond, her heart pounding as the implications of his words hung in the air, but before she could speak, her phone lit up. Madison's name flashed across the screen. Her stomach dropped. Madison never called during important moments unless it was urgent. "Excuse me," Isabel said, her voice tight as she stepped away from the podium, clutching her phone. "Family emergency." Her pulse raced as she answered. Madison's voice was hurried, worried. "It's Nathan. He fell trying to show Charlotte a cartwheel. Possible broken arm. We're heading to the emergency room." The world blurred as Isabel rushed out of the building, her presentation forgotten. The hours that followed were a haze of sterile hospital corridors, the bright glare of fluorescent lights, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Nathan's tear-streaked face haunted her as they waited for x-rays, the confirmation of a clean break, both a relief and another weight on her already heavy heart. Through it all, her phone buzzed with messages from Lucas, each one more concerned than the last. "Your son okay?" One read. Another, "Don't worry about the meeting." Crawford was out of line. His support was a faint lifeline in a night that felt impossibly long. By midnight, Nathan was finally asleep in his own bed, his small arm encased in a bright blue cast already adorned with Charlotte's scribbled drawings. Isabel sat on the back porch, the spring air carrying a faint promise of change. Her laptop glowed faintly beside her, filled with emails about the interrupted presentation. Among them was a formal complaint from Richard Crawford, citing unprofessional conduct. The audacity of it stung, but Isabel couldn't muster the energy to care. Not tonight. A soft knock on the front door startled her. Rising cautiously, she opened it to find Lucas standing there, his tie loosened and a paper bag in his hand. "I thought you might have missed dinner," he said quietly, his voice warm. "Hospital cafeteria food is terrible." The simple gesture cracked something inside her. Tears she had held back all day spilled over as Lucas set the bag down and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Nathan will be fine," he murmured, his voice steady and comforting. "Kids bounce back. And so will you." Later, as she sat on the porch with Lucas beside her, the weight of the day began to lift. The road ahead was still daunting, but for the first time in a long while, Isabel felt like she wasn't facing it alone. Lucas stood in the doorway, his tie slightly loosened, holding a plain brown paper bag. "I thought you might have missed dinner," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that melted the day's edges. "Hospital cafeteria food is awful." The simplicity of his kindness undid her. Isabel felt the dam break, and the tears she'd been holding back all day spilled over in quiet, unstoppable waves. "Hey," Lucas murmured, setting the bag down before pulling her into a gentle hug. His arms wrapped around her, steady and reassuring. "Nathan will be fine. Kids are resilient, they bounce back." Isabel pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes, her voice trembling. "It's not just that. Crawford was right. I'm in over my head, trying to be a professional, a student, a mother. I'm failing at all of it. Look at me." Lucas's voice cut through her doubt with quiet authority. "Look at you? All right. You presented a brilliant analysis today. You're maintaining a 3.8 GPA, and you just spent 6 hours making sure your son got the care he needed. That's not failure, Isabel. That's extraordinary." His words hung in the air, disarming her. Their eyes met, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to fade. Lucas's hand lingered on her arm, his touch warm and grounding, sending a quiet electricity through her. "I should go," he said softly, but he didn't move. "Yes," she whispered, but instead of stepping back, she found herself leaning closer. The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, a culmination of months of unspoken emotions. It started gentle, hesitant, but deepened quickly, carrying all the feelings they'd both buried beneath professional boundaries and busy lives. Isabel melted into the moment, allowing herself the rare luxury of simply being seen, being held, being understood. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world beyond her doorstep faded into insignificance. Here, in Lucas's arms, she felt not just comfort but a spark of something she hadn't dared to hope for, possibility. The kiss lingered, heavy with the warmth of connection and the unspoken relief of feeling seen, understood, and supported. But just as the moment deepened, the sharp slam of a car door outside shattered the spell. Isabel and Lucas pulled apart, both slightly breathless, their faces a mix of emotions. "I'm sorry," Lucas began, his voice soft but uncertain. "I shouldn't have." "Don't apologize," Isabel interrupted, her hand brushing his arm to reassure him. "But I need time. My kids, the job, my degree, it's all so precarious right now." Lucas nodded, understanding reflected in his steady gaze. "I know," he said. "And Crawford will make things harder. He's already pushing for an investigation into your hiring." "Let him," Isabel replied firmly, her shoulders straightening with resolve. "I earned my place here and I won't let anyone, Crawford or otherwise, make me doubt that again." Lucas gave her a small, approving nod before stepping back. "Good night, Isabel," he said, his voice laced with quiet admiration. And just like that he was gone. Isabel closed the door, letting the silence of the house wrap around her. She made her way upstairs to check on her children, the grounding force in her chaotic life. Nathan's cast glowed faintly in the dark, already decorated with colorful scribbles and doodles from both him and Sophie. Such a small thing, a broken arm, but it served as a poignant reminder of the delicate, relentless tightrope she walked every day. Her phone chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. The first notification, an email from Crawford, demanding a full audit of her department's activities. The second, a text from Lucas. "Don't worry about Crawford. I'll handle him." She stared at the messages for a moment before closing both without responding. There would be time for battles tomorrow, time to face Crawford's accusations and whatever challenges he threw her way. But tonight, she chose to focus on what mattered most: her children, her resolve, and the unshakable belief that she was stronger than the forces trying to pull her down. As she settled into bed, the echoes of the evening replayed in her mind. Lucas's kindness, Crawford's threats, and her own quiet defiance, all part of the journey she had chosen to take. Tomorrow would come with its storms, but Isabel Harper was no stranger to weathering them. For tonight, she allowed herself a rare moment of calm, knowing that she was ready to stand tall against whatever lay ahead. Isabel sat quietly in the dim light of her living room, her children fast asleep upstairs. Despite the chaos of the day and the growing complexity of her feelings for Lucas, tonight she sought solace in the simplest of things. Her gaze drifted to her desk, where her half-finished business law essay waited, a testament to the journey she'd embarked upon. Beside it, a photo of Sophie and Ethan beamed from its frame, their laughter frozen in time, a constant reminder of her purpose. Next to that lay her presentation notes, edges worn from hours of preparation, with Lucas's scrawled encouragements filling the margins. 3 distinct worlds, her family, her career, her education, collided there on that desk. But instead of overwhelming her, they reminded her how far she'd come. For the first time since Adrian left, Isabel felt strong enough to weather the storms ahead. The crisp autumn breeze carried a hint of wood smoke as Isabel hurried across the Willow State University campus the next evening. Her business ethics midterm had run late, and she was behind schedule to pick up Sophie and Ethan from their after-school activities. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a welcome distraction. It was a text from Lucas confirming their dinner plans for the following night. 8 months into their carefully balanced relationship, they'd finally found a rhythm. Quiet dinners after the kids were tucked into bed, stolen moments between meetings, and the occasional weekend lunch where Lucas effortlessly engaged Sophie and Ethan with his patient, genuine presence. The children had warmed to him slowly but surely, drawn to the way he made them feel seen and valued. For Isabel, those moments were precious, a reminder that life could still hold joy and connection even amidst the chaos. Lucas's kindness, his steady support, and his respect for her boundaries had become an anchor in her turbulent world. As she stepped into her car and headed toward the kids' schools, Isabel smiled to herself. There was still so much to juggle, so much uncertainty ahead, but for the first time in years she felt like she wasn't navigating it all alone. Together they were building something fragile but real, and Isabel was learning to embrace the beauty of that delicate balance. Last weekend, Lucas had spent 3 uninterrupted hours with Nathan, patiently helping him construct a model rocket for his science class. He hadn't checked his phone once or shown even a hint of boredom. The memory of Nathan's proud smile and Lucas's quiet encouragement made Isabel grin as she drove, warmth spreading through her chest. That warmth froze the moment she rounded the corner to Sophie's dance studio and saw him, Adrian. He was standing by the entrance, looking eerily unchanged since the day he walked out of their lives. The only difference was the faint lines etched around his eyes and a posture that held an unfamiliar uncertainty. Isabel's breath caught. On the bench beside him, Sophie sat, her face animated and alight as she talked, oblivious to the tension radiating from her mother. "What are you doing here?" Isabel demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Her grip on her keys tightened as she approached. Adrian raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I came to watch Sophie dance," he said, glancing at their daughter with a smile. Sophie beamed up at her mother, completely unaware of the storm brewing. "Can he come for ice cream with us?" Sophie asked excitedly, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Isabel's stomach clenched. "This isn't your custody day," she said firmly, her eyes narrowing at Adrian. "I was in the neighborhood," he replied casually, his tone aiming for nonchalance but falling short. "In the neighborhood?" Isabel's laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. "Your office is clear across town. And Victoria?" The name slipped from her lips like a challenge. "She's due any day now, isn't she?" Adrian's expression shifted, guilt flickering across his face. "She had the baby last week," he admitted reluctantly. "A boy?" The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs as she fought to keep her composure. That's why you're here?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm here for Sophie," he said softly, his tone laced with something that almost resembled regret. But Isabel wasn't ready to believe it. Not yet. As Sophie chattered happily about her dance class, the tension between them simmered just below the surface, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Isabel knew this was far from over, and whatever Adrian's motives, the road ahead just became even more complicated. "That's partly why I'm here," Adrian said, his tone softening, almost pleading. "We need to talk, Isabel." "Don't call me that," she snapped, the old nickname now feeling wrong, tainted. Turning to Sophie, she forced a tight smile. "Charlotte, honey, go grab your things. We need to pick up Ethan." Once Sophie disappeared inside, Isabel turned on Adrian, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You can't just show up like this. We have a custody agreement for a reason." "I know." "I'm sorry," he replied, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it momentarily made her chest ache. "But things have changed. Victoria, she's not who I thought she was. The baby, all of it, I made a horrible mistake." Isabel's breath caught as he took a step closer, his voice dropping. "I miss our family. I miss you." The words hung in the air, the same one she had once longed to hear. But now they tasted bitter like ash. Her voice was ice when she finally spoke. "You missed the convenience of having someone manage your life while you tore ours apart." "That's not fair," Adrian countered, his tone defensive yet desperate. "I'm trying to make things right." He stepped closer, his voice softening again, almost imploring. "I've been watching you with the kids, seeing how hard this has been for you. Let me help. Let me come home." "Home?" Isabel's voice cracked, but her resolve didn't. "You mean the home where I cried myself to sleep for months?" The home where our children learned their father could walk away without looking back? That home doesn't exist anymore, Adrian. Her words struck like a hammer, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. The weight of her pain, of everything she'd endured, filled the space where his excuses and regrets couldn't reach. Isabel's heart raced, not from lingering feelings but from the fury of knowing how much damage he had caused, and how far she had come despite it. Adrian's shoulders slumped, the realization sinking in. But Isabel didn't wait for his response. She turned away, her mind already moving forward. There was no place for him in the life she was rebuilding, and she was done looking back. "We don't exist anymore, Adrian," Isabel said firmly, her voice unwavering despite the ache in her chest. Before he could respond, Sophie burst out of the dance studio, waving a report card in her hand, her face lit up with excitement. "Mom, look what Miss Carla said about my pirouette," she exclaimed, oblivious to the tension lingering between her parents. The drive to Ethan's robotics club was excruciating. Sophie chattered happily in the back seat, sharing her dance updates with Adrian, who responded with overly enthusiastic praise. Meanwhile, Isabel gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The collision of the past she had left behind and the present she was fiercely trying to rebuild gnawed at her composure. By the time they reached the science center, Adrian had skillfully maneuvered an invitation to stay for dinner. Just to talk, he had insisted, his tone almost apologetic. The kids deserve that much. Isabel hadn't agreed but also hadn't pushed him away, not in front of them. Ethan's face lit up when he spotted Adrian waiting by the car. But his excitement quickly faded when he turned and saw Lucas standing near Isabel's vehicle. The sight of Lucas, calm, steady, and silently observing the situation, clashed painfully with Adrian's sudden re-emergence, leaving Ethan visibly confused. "I thought we were getting Chinese food," Ethan said hesitantly, glancing between the two men. The unspoken tension crackled in the air. Lucas, ever perceptive, assessed the scene with practiced neutrality. His expression remained composed as he offered an easy out. "I can come back another time," he said, his tone light but cautious. "No," Isabel said, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "Adrian was just leaving." Adrian's tone shifted, holding a sharp edge of defiance. "I was invited to dinner." "Family dinner?" The emphasis on the word family wasn't lost on anyone. Sophie and Ethan looked nervously between their parents, uncertainty clouding their earlier excitement. Isabel straightened her shoulders, standing taller, her decision clear. She wouldn't let Adrian's presence derail the stability she was working so hard to rebuild, for her kids and for herself. "Dinner plans are changing," she said evenly, her tone calm but resolute. Adrian's return might have unsettled the balance of her carefully managed life, but Isabel wasn't about to let him dictate the course of her future. Not again. Sensing the tension in the air, Lucas stepped in smoothly, his voice calm and reassuring. "Kids, why don't you show your dad your new science projects?" he suggested. "Give your mom and me a minute to talk." Sophie and Ethan hesitated, glancing at Isabel before nodding and pulling Adrian toward the science center's display. Isabel watched them go, her chest tightening as Lucas turned to her, his gaze steady and full of concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. "No," Isabel admitted, letting out a shaky breath. "He says he made a mistake, that he wants to come home." Lucas's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he asked a single, disarming question. "And what do you want?" The simplicity of it caught her off guard. In all the months of their relationship, Lucas had never pushed, never demanded. He had always let her set the pace, respecting her boundaries. Now, faced with his unwavering gaze, Isabel finally let herself answer. "I want," her voice faltered before growing stronger. "I want to move forward, not backward. I want my children to see that happiness doesn't mean settling. I want them to know it's okay to rebuild after everything falls apart. I want," she paused, swallowing hard. "What do you want, Lucas?" "You," he said simply, the single word carrying a weight that felt like freedom. "I want you, Isabel." She blinked, emotions swirling within her. "But my kids. They need stability," Lucas finished for her, his tone gentle. "And Adrian showing up like this, stirring up old hopes and hurts, that's not stability." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, the name flashing across the screen making her stomach twist. Richard Crawford. "Don't answer," Lucas advised, his voice firm. "He's been digging into your personal life, trying to use your divorce against you." The intrusion of Crawford's manipulations brought her focus back, sharpening her resolve. Isabel silenced the call, slipping the phone back into her bag without hesitation. Let him dig, she said, her voice steady. I've survived worse. He won't break me. Lucas's expression softened, a flicker of pride lighting his eyes. No, he won't, he agreed. Because you're stronger than him. And you don't have to face this alone. Isabel's heart swelled at his words, the weight of her emotions pressing against the walls she'd built around herself. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that moving forward wasn't just possible. It was the only choice that truly felt right. Let him dig, Isabel said firmly, silencing the call without a second thought. I'm not ashamed of my past or my present. The evening that followed tested every ounce of her strength. Adrian sat in the living room, reminiscing about old times with the children, their laughter filling the space as they hung on his every word. Lucas remained nearby, keeping his distance but offering a quiet, steady presence. The unspoken tension in the room was almost palpable, the weight of choices and unresolved emotions pressing down on all of them. When the kids were finally asleep, the atmosphere shifted. Isabel found Adrian lingering in the kitchen, his posture hesitant yet familiar. We could try again, he said softly. For them. For us. There is no us, Isabel replied, her voice calm but resolute. There's only who we used to be, and who we are now. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he pressed on. And who you are now doesn't need me anymore because of him? He jerked his head toward the living room where Lucas had stayed behind, waiting. Her eyes narrowed. You don't get to deflect this onto him. You made your choices, Adrian. And yes, I've moved on. I've spent the past year rebuilding myself and our children's lives. What we had ended the moment you chose someone else. You've known him, what, 8 months? Adrian said, his tone defensive. We have 12 years of history. Exactly, Isabel said, standing straighter. Her voice sharpened with each word, her resolve hardening. History. What we had is over. I've worked too hard to rebuild myself and my life to let you tear it down just because your new life didn't turn out the way you planned. The kids need their father, he countered, his voice rising slightly. They have their father, Isabel replied evenly. On scheduled custody days. But what they need more than that is to see their mother strong, whole, and happy. And I won't sacrifice that, not for you, not for anyone. Adrian stood there for a moment, his mouth opening as if to argue, but no words came. Isabel's unwavering gaze left no room for rebuttal. Finally, he nodded stiffly and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. As Isabel leaned against the counter, her thoughts swirled. The confrontation had drained her, but it had also solidified something within her. She wasn't the woman Adrian had left behind. She was stronger, more self-assured, and unwilling to settle for anything less than what she and her children deserved. What they need now, Isabel said quietly, is to see their mother happy, whole, and strong enough to choose her own path. After Adrian left, she found Lucas in the living room, sitting with his laptop open on his lap. He wasn't working, though. His fingers hovered idly over the keys as if he couldn't focus. When she sat down beside him, he closed it and turned to her, his expression calm yet attentive. I should have warned you he was back, she said softly, the weight of the evening still pressing on her. You didn't owe me that, Lucas replied, his voice steady. He took her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on her palm. You don't owe anyone explanations for your choices, Isabel. Not me, not Adrian, not Crawford. You've earned the right to decide your own future. She exhaled deeply, leaning into him, allowing his quiet strength to support her. The walls she had so carefully constructed around herself softened in his presence. Stay tonight, she murmured, almost a plea. Are you sure? Lucas asked, his voice gentle but searching. Isabel lifted her head to meet his gaze. The kids need to see that love can be gentle, respectful, and chosen, she said, her words firm yet filled with vulnerability. I'm choosing you, Lucas. If you'll have me. His kiss was answer enough, a tender yet undeniable affirmation of everything left unspoken. Later, as they lay entwined in her bed, Isabel's thoughts wandered. She thought of the choices she had made, some taken from her, others she had given away, and the one she was finally strong enough to make for herself. The road ahead loomed uncertain and filled with challenges. Crawford's relentless investigations, Adrian's attempts to reclaim their past, and the constant balancing act of work, school, and motherhood. But in Lucas's arms, Isabel found a moment of peace, a reminder that strength wasn't just in enduring but in allowing herself to feel, to connect, and to choose a life that was truly her own. Tomorrow would bring its storms, but tonight she allowed herself this quiet triumph. She was no longer just surviving, she was living, and for the first time in years she felt free. Motherhood, career, and the weight of her past loomed large in Isabel's life, But tonight, wrapped in Lucas's arms, she knew she had chosen right. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a final text from Adrian. "This isn't over." Isabel stared at the message for a moment before calmly deleting it. Some chapters were meant to stay closed, she thought, for new ones to begin. She exhaled deeply, letting go of the lingering shadows of her past. 18 months later, the woman reflected in the full-length mirror bore little resemblance to the one who had crumbled in the foyer on that fateful night. Isabel smoothed the midnight blue gown over her hips, its elegant lines accentuating the quiet confidence she now carried. A smile tugged at her lips as she remembered Lucas's reaction when she had chosen the dress for tonight's charity gala, Anderson Enterprises' biggest night of the year. Now, as the newly promoted director of operations, Isabel had a pivotal role to play. The thought brought a swell of pride and a twinge of nerves, but she was ready. "Mom, you look like a princess." Sophie's delighted voice broke the silence, and Isabel turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, already dressed for bed. Madison, their trusted babysitter, stood behind her, smiling warmly. "Thank you, sweetie," Isabel said, kneeling carefully so as not to wrinkle her gown. "Now remember, I'll be home late, but I'll come kiss you goodnight even if you're sleeping." "Will Lucas be there?" Ethan called from his room, his voice curious but teasing. "Yes," Isabel replied, rising to her feet. "But as my boss, not my date." The distinction mattered, especially after all she had faced in proving herself professionally. Lucas had been supportive of maintaining clear boundaries at work, ensuring no one could undermine her accomplishments. Madison chuckled. "They're just fishing for gossip." Isabel smiled, kissing Sophie's forehead before turning back to the mirror for one last glance. The reflection staring back at her wasn't just polished and poised, it was resilient and self-assured, a woman who had reclaimed her life, her confidence, and her future. "All right," she said, grabbing her clutch. "Time to go show the world what I can do." With one last wave to her children, she stepped into the evening, ready to embrace the life she had worked so hard to rebuild. Maintaining boundaries at work events had become essential, especially after Crawford's attempts to undermine her professionally. Isabel and Lucas had agreed early on to keep their relationship separate from the office, and tonight would be no exception. Her phone buzzed with a text and she glanced at the screen. "Kids say you have a big speech tonight. Good luck." It was from Adrian. Their relationship had evolved into something resembling civil co-parenting, though it hadn't come easily. His eventual acceptance of her refusal to reconcile had smoothed some of the sharp edges between them, and the birth of his son, Michael, seemed to have tempered his once volatile emotions. Still, Victoria's occasional snide comments found ways to sting, subtle reminders of the woman who had upended Isabel's former life. The drive to the Boston Harbor Hotel felt surreal. Just a year ago, she had been drowning, grappling with divorce proceedings, custody battles, and Crawford's relentless investigations into her rise at the company. Now, she was poised to present her department's revolutionary efficiency protocols to over 300 industry leaders. The transformation felt almost too big to grasp, but Isabel knew she had earned every moment of it. Lucas was waiting in the hotel lobby, looking effortlessly composed in a sharp tuxedo. His presence was steady, reassuring. "Ready?" he asked, his tone professional, though the warmth in his eyes hinted at something more. "Born ready," Isabel replied with a confident smile. This time the words weren't just for show. While nerves still danced beneath the surface, her confidence was no longer a facade, it was the hard-won result of everything she had overcome. The ballroom was dazzling, its crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over Boston's elite. Isabel moved through the crowd with practiced ease, fielding questions about her department's successes and steering conversations with the poise of someone who belonged. A year ago, she would have been overwhelmed by the grandeur and expectations of a night like this. But tonight she wasn't just surviving the moment, she was owning it. As the time for her presentation approached, Isabel glanced toward Lucas, who gave her a subtle nod from across the room. It was a small gesture, but it grounded her, reminding her of how far she had come, and how much further she was ready to go. Isabel navigated the glittering ballroom with poise, graciously accepting praise for her department's success while deftly deflecting subtle inquiries about her relationship with Lucas. She felt Crawford's gaze on her from the edges of the crowd, lurking like a shadow. His attempts to discredit her had failed spectacularly when his own past misconduct was finally exposed, leaving him bitter but powerless. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host called, his voice echoing across the grand room, "please welcome our Director of Operations, Isabel Harper." The spotlight swept across the crowd and found her as she stepped onto the stage. The room stilled, hundreds of eyes fixed on her. From his place in the audience, Lucas watched with quiet pride, his gaze unwavering. Meanwhile, Crawford's face darkened with barely concealed resentment. But neither man's reaction mattered to Isabel the way it once might have. Tonight, she wasn't proving herself to anyone but the woman she had fought so hard to become. 18 months ago she began, her voice steady and clear. I thought I had lost everything. My marriage had imploded, my confidence was shattered, and my future seemed impossibly dark. I was someone's ex-wife, someone's mother, someone's employee. But somewhere along the way I forgot how to be myself. The room fell silent, drawn in by the raw honesty in her voice. Every breath, every glance, hung on her words as she spoke with the kind of vulnerability that only strength could provide. What I didn't realize then, Isabel continued, was that sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what we're truly capable of building. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Tonight isn't just about business protocols or efficiency metrics. It's about transformation, of companies, of systems, and of people. Her gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on the faces of those who had doubted her, and finally landing on Lucas, whose quiet nod sent a surge of courage through her. Transformation comes when we choose to rise from the ashes of what was and create something new. It comes when we refuse to let the past define us and instead, build a future we believe in. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Isabel barely heard it. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to prove herself anymore. She had already done that, to herself. This wasn't just a speech or a moment of triumph. It was the culmination of a journey. One she had fought for, earned, and finally fully embraced. Of systems, of companies, and yes, of people. Isabel's voice carried through the room with clarity and conviction as she detailed her department's innovations. She spoke of the problems they had solved, the inefficiencies they had eliminated, and the millions of dollars they had saved. But beneath the corporate success story lay a deeper current, one of personal triumph. Change isn't just about implementing new systems, Isabel continued, her tone firm yet heartfelt. It's about having the courage to examine what isn't working, the strength to let go of familiar patterns, and the vision to build something better. Whether in business or in life, true success comes from believing in your own worth, even when others doubt you. Her gaze swept across the room, landing momentarily on Richard Crawford. He sat at a table near the back, his expression guarded but attentive. Isabel's voice sharpened as she pressed forward. Some will try to diminish your achievements, she said, the weight of her words directed squarely at him. They'll suggest you didn't earn your place. To them I say this, watch me rise. Watch me succeed. Watch me prove that the greatest power lies not in tearing others down but in lifting yourself up. The room erupted into thunderous applause, the sound echoing through the grand ballroom. Isabel stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and exhilaration. She had done more than deliver a speech, she had reclaimed her narrative. Later, during the dinner service, Crawford approached her table. His expression was carefully neutral, but his tone carried a trace of grudging respect. Impressive speech, he said. I may have misjudged you. Isabel met his gaze, her composure unwavering. No, she replied calmly, a faint smile playing on her lips. You judged me exactly as you meant to. You just didn't expect me to be stronger than your judgment. For a moment, Crawford held her stare, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then, with a curt nod, he stepped away, retreating into the crowd. As she turned back to her table, Isabel felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had faced her critics, her doubts, and the ghosts of her past, and she had emerged stronger. This wasn't just her victory, it was a testament to the woman she had become. Crawford nodded stiffly and retreated into the crowd, his pride intact but his power diminished. As he left, Lucas passed by Isabel's table, his hand brushing her shoulder in a brief, reassuring touch. The gesture was subtle, yet it spoke volumes, of pride, of support, and of something far deeper. As the evening wound down, Isabel stepped out onto the hotel's waterfront terrace, seeking a moment of quiet. The Boston skyline shimmered across the harbor, its lights reflecting on the water like a mosaic of possibilities. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cool night air brushing against her skin. Lucas joined her moments later, keeping a respectful distance despite the privacy of the terrace. The board was impressed, he said, his voice soft but certain. You've officially silenced the last of the doubters? Isabel turned to face him, a quiet smile touching her lips. I didn't do it for them, she said, her voice steady, yet tinged with emotion. I did it for the woman who, 18 months ago, thought her life was over. For my children who needed to see their mother stand tall. And for myself, the self I finally learned to value. Lucas's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, the distance between them shrinking. I love you, he said simply, his words unadorned yet powerful. Not because you're strong, though you are. Not because you're successful, though you've earned every accolade. I love you because you're authentically, unapologetically yourself. Isabel's breath caught as he continued, his tone turning gentle, almost playful. Even when yourself is a mess of insecurities during those 3 a.m. study sessions. Her laugh was quiet, genuine, as warmth spread through her chest. Lucas's words weren't just a declaration. They were an anchor, a reflection of the journey she had taken to rebuild her life, not just for others but for herself. As the city lights twinkled in the distance, Isabel felt, for the first time in years, not just whole but deeply, truly seen. Especially then, Lucas said, his voice teasing but warm as a smile curved his lips. Though I have to admit, watching you handle Crawford tonight was particularly attractive. Isabel's laugh was soft, her cheeks flushing slightly at his words. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed, cutting through the quiet moment. It was a text from Madison, accompanied by a photo of Sophie and Ethan. They were fast asleep but still dressed in their party clothes, Sophie in her glittering dress and Ethan in his clip-on tie. The sight made Isabel's chest ache with a mix of love and longing. They insisted on dressing up to celebrate your big night, Madison had written. Lucas glanced at the photo over Isabel's shoulder, his smile turning tender. Go home, he said gently. Be with your children. We have all the time in the world. Isabel nodded, her heart full. We do, she agreed, her voice soft but sure. Because this time, I'm choosing this life, not falling into it, not clinging to it out of fear or obligation. I'm choosing it completely and without reservation. The drive home was peaceful, her speech notes forgotten in her clutch. As she glanced out the window, Boston drifted by, a city that had once mirrored her sense of loss and now stood as a testament to her resilience. Here she had been broken, rebuilt, and ultimately rediscovered. When she arrived, Isabel found her children exactly as Madison's photo had shown them. She knelt beside their beds, kissing them softly and breathing in the comforting scent of childhood, the innocence, the safety, the love she had fought so hard to protect. In her home office, the evidence of her journey surrounded her. Her diploma from the accelerated business program lay ready to be framed, a physical symbol of the late nights, sacrifices, and determination that had carried her forward. Nearby was a stack of work materials, including a letter confirming her recent promotion. As she stood in the quiet space, Isabel let herself feel the full weight of what she had accomplished, not just for her children, not just for her career, but for herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And for the first time in years, she felt truly free to embrace everything the future had to offer. The walls of Isabel's office were no longer just adorned with photos of Sophie and Ethan. They were a gallery of her journey. Images of her children smiled alongside snapshots of her achievements, new friendships, and milestones in the life she had fought so hard to rebuild. On her desk sat a simple frame holding the evening speech notes, the margins filled with Lucas's familiar handwriting. The message, written with quiet encouragement, read, "You never needed saving. You just needed to remember your own strength." As the weight of the evening began to settle, Isabel slipped out of her midnight blue gown and into something more comfortable. She sank into her favorite chair, the one that had cradled her through countless nights of tears, exhaustion, and transformation. This time as she sat there, it wasn't grief that filled her, it was peace. Her phone lit up with messages. Congratulations from friends, each one a small testament to how far she had come. A heart emoji from Lucas, simple yet filled with warmth. And finally, a message from Adrian, "You've changed everything, including my understanding of strength." Isabel smiled faintly at his words but didn't feel the need to respond. Some conversations no longer required her energy. She had long since stopped seeking closure from the past. The life she had built now was answer enough. Tomorrow would bring its challenges as it always did. Balancing the demands of her growing career with motherhood, nurturing her relationship with Lucas while maintaining professional boundaries, and proving herself in a world that often underestimated her, all of it lay ahead. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of her journey, Isabel Harper felt something she hadn't in years: completeness. It wasn't a man's love or validation that made her whole. It wasn't even her professional success or academic achievements. It was the quiet realization that she had reclaimed her life on her own terms, rediscovered her strength, and chosen her own path. For the first time, Isabel wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And as the night wrapped around her, she let herself simply exist in the fullness of that truth, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Because Isabel had learned the most important lesson of all. True strength isn't found in never falling, it's in rising again and again, every time life knocks you down. It's in choosing to stand even when the world seems determined to keep you on your knees. She reached for her laptop, opening the document that held her next big project. The screen glowed softly, a symbol of the future stretching before her, full of possibilities she had earned. This time she wasn't simply stepping into the unknown, she was embracing it. She had reclaimed the right to choose, and she was ready for whatever came next. As the night deepened, Isabel reflected on her journey. A story of transformation forged through heartbreak, resilience, and self-discovery. Her life now was not the one she had envisioned years ago, but it was one she had built with intention and courage. And now, a question for you. At what point in your life did you realize it was time to reinvent yourself? Was it a loss like Isabel's that pushed you to step outside your comfort zone? Or was it an internal awakening, a call to risk everything for a chance at something greater? How has that decision shaped the person you are today? Your story matters, and we'd love to hear it. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found inspiration in Isabel's journey, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next powerful story. Sometimes the challenges in life are like a gift, an opportunity to discover your true self. In moments of hardship, it's okay to cry, but never give up, because these are the trials from above that help you grow stronger. Thank you for watching our video to the end. If you have any thoughts or stories to share, feel free to leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to enjoy more inspiring stories and embark on this journey together every day. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Remember, true strength is not in never falling, but in rising every single time.